Before I start telling stories, I'm actually going to tell you something I wrote a few years ago, and it just came to me, and it was about storytelling. And I found it last night when I was going through all the stuff that I was going to read today, so I thought I would read it. Storytelling, the magical healing power of words. Words are not just about what they appear to mean. They are letters placed together that, when spoken in the correct way, cause a resonance in the listener that alters their mindset. Mindsets are the result of a belief, and belief is not knowledge. It is just the way one thinks about something that has been fed via education, religion, and the society you live in. What is a belief for one is not necessarily so for another. Knowledge is something else altogether. When you experience a sense of knowing within you, it is because your whole being resonates with what you are receiving. The words have enchanted you. They have cast their spell. And words are primarily to do with spelling. Enchantment. Chant. To say words in a particular way that speaks to the heart. And it is the heart that resonates with knowing. It is the heart that is enchanted. It is the heart that is connected to the etheric light body, that in turn is connected to Source. It is knowledge at the heart level that will create a truth that is relevant for you now. What is truth? It is a stepping stone to the next level of understanding, and will hold true for you as long as you need it, and it will be superseded by a greater truth which carries on ad infinitum. There is no one truth. There is only experience available, which brings further understanding. The priesthood have always understood the power of resonance. They have been taught how to present the sounds of words to get the maximum effect and response from the congregation. This enables them to maintain their power as so-called intermediaries between God and the individual. You are all in divide until you realize your unity with the One, and then you no longer need the middleman, the priest. But it is not expedient for the Church to teach this. The spelling of the individual has been maintained. This is history, his story. Storytelling is mystery, my story, the story of a woman. My stories are to be enjoyed, to make you think, to give you a different slant on life, a new lilt to your step, and a smile on your face. And with that, I will begin my storytelling. Now, some time ago, I mentioned John Powell's Margot's Guide, and I found a little more that he said to us, and I thought you would be interested to hear. This was Christmas evening, 1978, and he had asked Margot and her husband and me to sit in meditation, which we did, and then he spoke to us. Beautiful triangle, so blissfully ignorant that you do not have to be dead to reach the Godhead. Within this room there is experienced the peace that all three that formed the triangle, the Trinity, had reached so high a level the Godhead was within your very selves. So many have lived many lives, yet not experienced such beauty. Yet these three in this room have already reached the Godhead in the peaceful, blissful meditation that even I knew nothing of, either in Britain or India. Peace be with you and remain forever. What a wonderful gift on a Christmas evening. And then 2 days later, we received this message from John. I have tried to project into each mind a golden path. You have all had one foot placed on it, and it is up to each one of you to follow along this path of truth, which you will interpret in your own way. The way to the truth is hard and requires much work, yet you three will work and succeed, I know. I shall help all I can. Just keep the golden path open ahead of you, and I hope I have projected it enough for you all to see. I shall return. John always finished his communication with those words when we were out, and he would always say, I will return, or I shall return. He was just like an officer, still. And then on the 26th of January 1979, Margot and I were sitting alone for a period of quiet meditation when he spoke again. I was loath to interrupt the quietness that your mind was in. The Godhead that both of you are searching for was very near you both, as your spirits were ready to receive the love and absorb the energy that was bestowed upon you. Energy such as I have not known, either where I am or back where I was. From the ice and snow to the heat, it makes no difference whether one prays to God or Shiva or Kali. The same Godhead is there, waiting and loving and bestowing. The ascent of the conscious mind to the ethereal planes absorbs much spiritual strength. Long may it continue. I shall return to dwell on more earthly things later. So these were the kind of things that the kind of words that we were being given at the very beginning. Such depth to them. And as I read them today, I realise they were so deep, so God-centred. And perhaps this is why I'm like I am today, because of all I've learnt in the past. Anyway, I would just read you a little thing about he releases the Earthbound with us. And this was one of his little sentences that he said to us. Although we are apart, it is as if we are all together as a regiment and march in an orderly manner. I, as an officer, command you to find the earthbound souls at certain places. You, Margot, with your troops, Walter and Carolyn, march on and carry out your orders. This is working well. Most of these souls are not bad people, just rather foolish and perhaps a little obstinate. Carry on with this work, as there are many more for you to find. So we carried on with that work. And today I'm going to read you one of the drop-in communicators, and her name is Zara Boswell. She was a gypsy, and she was a real Romany, actually, not just a gypsy, a true Romany she referred to herself as. So I will tell you her story. Hear me. I could not read or write, or then speak your tongue, as you do, but can talk now, so write fastly. My name is Zara Boswell, a true Romany with second sight. My earliest memories are in a forest glade with my lovely mother, her hair so black and glossy. Our home was the brightest painted one of the tribe, and our horse the best. I learned to bake hedgehog by coating them with clay and watching their prickles come away as they cooked. We learnt to talk pretty to the Gorgio ladies and fear the Gorgio men, who were always chasing us off their land. The woods and the forests are free, my Da always said. Hear me, and right fastly. I was 9 years old when I knew I had the second sight. The woman of our tribe would sit with her clay pipe and teach us young how to read the palm and how to speak in the tongue of the Gorgio, how to tell pretty ladies what they wanted to hear, and how to tell the new bride of the children she would bear. Then, behind the old woman, her home was burning, flames and smoke. I cried out as no one was doing a thing to help. They laughed at me. Her home was not on fire. 3 days later she died in her sleep, and they burnt her home as I had seen. They laughed at me no more. What I saw, always flames of the home before a death, always the sounds of music and laughter before a marriage. I learnt to gather osier and make baskets, read palms, trap rabbits and make stews. I learnt to talk Gorgio, and then Jake came to our camp. Our eyes knew we would go through the ceremony together. I heard music, but I saw an old woman always behind his shoulder, and I was feared. I had the red frilled skirt for the ceremony and flowers in my hair. Our hands be cut and bound together, and our blood was one. The singing, dancing, music, and then into our own lovely red and yellow home with all things new that Jake had bought. We travelled all over Kent, Surrey and Sussex. Such a lovely spring, but always the old woman behind him. The Gorgio lady who gave me baby clothes had a boy behind her, and I knew it would be her son to die before he was a man, but could not make sense of the old woman. When my son was born, more singing and dancing around the fire, and I pretended the old woman was not there. Freedom is life, and life is freedom, roaming the countryside, laughing at Gorgios who knew no freedom. The birds in the air are free, though we sometimes caught one in a cage and sold it to a Gorgio lady, but that was to get money for flour or sugar. The woman behind Jake was my only worry. 3 more children to play around my skirts, thin but healthy and brown as a hazelnut, not like white, sickly Gorgio children. Jake not come home one night from the market he took some horses to. Jake was a good man, always straight home to me and the children, never one for fighting or drinking, and said leave that to Gorgios. But he did not come home. Old Granny looked after the children and I went to look for him. Next morn the world looked sad as rain poured down. I learnt the awful news he was in prison for stealing a woman's purse and was to go to court. Not Jake, not Jake, not Jake. The woman falsely accused Jake, yet he was sentenced to 6 years. They are too hard on our people. The Gorgios hate us so much. I went to the court and the Gorgio woman was there telling lies that Jake took her purse and ran off. I felt like screaming, as it was the old woman who'd been with Jake, always behind him since we first met. I knew she was his killer and he would never return to me. I cursed her and her descendants. Twice more I was able to visit Jake, and the old woman had gone from behind him. She'd got what she wanted. I did not travel with the tribe when they left. I stayed with the children and old Granny and her strangeling son, who was able to keep us from starving with his poaching and trapping wild things. I made pegs and picked wild flowers which I sold to the Gorgios, who I hated and cursed more and more for taking my Jake. I told their fortunes, and I delighted in telling them bad things, and laughed at their worry lines that came. The second time I saw Jake, he looked ill, and I knew he would not live long. The old woman was from a past life of his, who had now had her revenge. Jake was dead. He could not survive being shut up. He was a man of freedom. I thought I would go mad, but then my life was shown to me through my second sight. I could get my revenge by taking anything I wanted from the Gorgios, as they had taken my man from me. I was quick with my fingers, and it was so easy when reading a palm to remove a loose ring or bracelet. Life with my children and revenge on the Gorgios. When old Granny died, her son took off and was not seen again. I burnt the caravan and hitched up the horses and went off. I knew the tribe was in Sussex, as a passing Didicoy told me just where. I sold the rings I had hidden in a hollow tree, and then met up with them all. Poor Jake, how they all felt over him dying from lack of freedom. The same will be of you, they said, and made me promise not to steal again. My children were growing fast and needed a man to keep a firm hand on them. Jake was the only man I would ever have. Our blood had come together for always. I would meet him again when I was on earth again. My cousin's wife had died in childbirth, which was not uncommon in the 1870s, and we came to an arrangement he would act as my man in the tribe. I would look after his 2 children and give him the money that I earned at my palm reading. We all went back to Kent, which was the place I liked best, as that was where I first met Jake. The children learnt all the things true Romanis should learn. I told women when their children would be born to the hour, and whether they be man or girl babies. I told the men where the best places were to go poaching and where the rabbits could be trapped. The Gorgios I delighted in telling bad things, and the name of Zara became known for palm reading, and I was able to put some money aside without giving my cousin anything short of what he expected. My children had grown and wed Romany men and women. I had grandchildren. I lived alone and went wherever the tribe wandered. At one place, a Gorgio lady came to have her palm read. Her husband had a job with the government. I could see him taking money and being put behind bars. I could see she could stop this happening if I warned her, as she wanted more pretty things for her home than he could afford. I told her a lot of nonsense, but warned her not. How I laughed when I heard how there was a court case and so much talk and shame for her and all her family. Once again, Zara had a little revenge for her Jake. Hear me for the last time. I am about to take a new body, not of a Romany this time, but I know I shall always have the second sight, no matter how many times I return to the earthly world. I was wrong to take revenge. This much I now know. Again and again I told Gorgio ladies, and sometimes their menfolk, silly lies instead of the real truth, which could have saved much suffering, much heartache. Jake suffered through an old woman's lies, but is happy now, and we will meet again as destiny or God made Jake and me for each other, over and over again. A long-gone Romany smiles upon you, Gorgio, for writing for her, and wishes you nothing but much well-being and happiness, as next time on earth I shall know with Jake, be happy people, not persecuted ones. Freedom and happiness for you, from Zara. Well, I loved that case. I love Zara Boswell. And while he was able to do some verification there, he said Zara herself wasn't verified, but the details about life as a Romany gypsy in the 19th century, he was able to say. The surname Boswell is one of the old family names of the Romany tribes. And in a book written by a true Romany, it's called In the Life of a Romany Gypsy, by Manfrey Frederick Wood, Walter found references to the mingling of blood in the marriage ceremony, to the cooking of special stews and hedgehogs baked in clay, to the burning of caravans when their owners died, and such terms as gorgio, non-gypsy, and didikoi, gypsy of mixed blood. The Boswell case was also of interest because Zara said she couldn't write. And the scripts for the first time were in Margot's own handwriting, which seems to prove she receives the messages clairaudiently. So that was very interesting. It's also interesting to me because Reggie's uncle was a Romany. In Gloucester, he was the king of the gypsies in Gloucester, king of the Romanys in Gloucester. And they had a wonderful caravan. And when he died first, and there was a great celebration, all the Romanys came from everywhere to celebrate. And then when his wife died, they burnt the caravan. But it wasn't a Vardo like the old caravans. It was a big, modern £25,000 caravan. And I have a photograph, unfortunately I don't have it here, of the caravan being burnt when she died. So there's gypsy blood in Reggie's family. So that was Zara. Now, the next one I would like to read you is another of my favourite ladies. Her name is golly, I've forgotten her name, isn't this dreadful? Lady Worsley. She was a member of the Worsley family, who was the family, big family at Wroxall. Appledurcombe Manor was Appledurcombe House was the home of the Worsleys. And there is a wonderful gate, and I've got it here. I took a photograph of it last night to show you, because this is the gate where we rescued this lady. It's called Fremantle Gate. Can you see it? You can. It's a magnificent gate, and it's the entrance to Appledurcombe House. Standing alone in the fields above God's Hill is a magnificent gateway, the one I've just shown you, known as Fremantle Gate, and it's all that remains of a once cobbled carriageway leading to the ruined home of the Worsley family. The wrought iron gates stand between an enormous stone archway with side gates complementing the elaborate design. They are resplendent in blue and gold with a coat of arms of the Worsley family carved into the stone over the centre, a reminder of the grandeur of Appledurcombe in its heyday. The gate can be reached by a cart track leading from the village of Godshill, which is all that remains of the original coach road, or from Wroxall. And this is the road that we took, and we walked through cornfields and meadows where cows contentedly graze, unaware of the history that lingers still around them. John Powles had told her that an Earthbound needed help. And it was a sunny July afternoon, and I walked barefoot through the golden corn to the field beyond, my thoughts upon the work ahead. Who was it that needed our help this time, and what new story would unfold? Suddenly the gate was there before us, standing in the middle of nowhere, so alone, yet so imposing. An old lodge cottage, long since fallen into ruin, stood to the right, and we felt an inner compunction to enter, and in our imagination we saw it fleetingly as a home again, as we walked through the old doorway into what had once been a carefully tended cottage garden. There were orange blossom and fuchsia still blooming in defiance of the decay and desolation of the old lodge to the great house of the Worsleys. I might tell you that old lodge, since these days when I went out with Margot, has been totally restored, and it is now somebody's beautiful home again. But it was a complete ruin. We clambered back out over the broken wall and sat down in the silence of the afternoon, leaning against the huge stone pillars of the gateway, and waited for the one who was waiting for us. A woman's voice began speaking to Margot. I declare he was the most handsome man I had ever seen. Dark hair, brown skin, twinkling blue eyes, and so tall. I had returned from London and Paris to find this Adonis open the gate for my carriage. As he touched his forelock, I granted him a smile and a nod. Such a stranger must be investigated by one who took lovers like changing a gown. The next day, I made it my business to find out who he was. And now I am here, looking for the rough peasant who meant more to me than my husband, or the ton that I picked my lovers from. This Adonis was staying with his parents, who were the gatekeepers. He had his wife with him and a mewling babe, she wet nursing an infant of a member of the household. We met when I let the pink curling feather from my hat loose to float at his feet. This started a conversation. He was tongue-tied at first, poor handsome creature. But to be tumbled in the hay like a village maid was a new experience. Now, where is he? I left to return to London, but thought of him in my dreams. Back to London again, to Vauxhall Gardens, to Wight's, to the assembly rooms, to the arms of yet another lover, to balls and routs. Then to return to find him still here, waiting. His hands so rough, yet his caresses as soft and gentle as no other man. He was sent away when his wife finished her duties as a wet nurse. La, how that woman irked me. Jealousy was my middle name, methinks. But never again did I inhale the pungent scent of the ferns without recalling the sweetest bed of all. My husband cared not. The most famous of all the Worsleys, a rake, a serpent. But he did improve the house, that much I give him credit for. Now here am I, waiting for what I do not know. The greatest of lovers is not here, the cottage so different, ruined, all ruined. No roadway, people in ugly clothes, women dressed as men. What can I do? Pray tell me. La, but you all wear such strange attire, one in pantaloons that are straight, and one in a skirt without several petticoats, and one in a skirt so short. Fie, I feel faint at the thought. Yet I know these strangers from another century have freed me from ever seeking my Adonis, the man whose body I yearned for. My sin was adultery. Not just adultery, yet over and over again, and out of my station in life. I do crave forgiveness in the house of God, a house where one only went to impress the common people, to flaunt one's fine feathers, one's patches in the right spots, and one's hat's silken hose and satin petticoats. Now, nothing like this is needed. Just love of God, who I neglected. I see a shaft of light, a green band, and I can go onwards. I pray, do not abuse my soul where I am to go. Treat me kindly. Repentance will be sweet, I am so certain. Goodbye forever, gateway and cottage, farewell. So that was my lovely lady. I love her, Lady Worsley. Her husband, Sir Richard Worsley, married Seymour Dorothy Fleming, that was her name, in 1775. 7 years later they parted, following a divorce action brought by Richard against Captain Bissett of K. Knighton, the last of his wife's 27 lovers. Admitted lovers, that was. Sir Richard's own reputation was bad, and he left the country for a time, but he had indeed made the house into a fine building with many improvements. Anyway, we didn't take her to the church at God's Hill where the Worsley family had worshipped, but to Newchurch to pray for the release of the spirit of Lady Worsley, and from the thoughts that had kept her bound to that lonely spot for so many, many years. Now, I'm going to read you when we went to Newchurch to pray for the soul of Lady Worsley, I heard a noise while Margot was writing, and when it was silent, and I heard a noise in the Dillington Chapel, which is the chapel opposite the Bamford Chapel that I was speaking about last week. The church is like that, shaped like a cross, and the Bamford Chapel's on the left, and the Dillington Chapel's on the Bamford Chapel's on the right, and the Dillington Chapel's on the left. And I heard this noise. No one else heard it. However, I entered the chapel, but no one was there, no priest or woman with long flowing clothes, just an extreme coldness that penetrated my bones. We shivered, and Margaret said she felt the presence of someone, but no voice spoke. However, we came away, and it had to wait for another day. And this was what I wrote when we returned late in January, when the first watery sunshine began to bring a promise of spring to the greyness of the long winter days. Someone was calling Margot to Newchurch. She had received no instruction, only an insistent inner knowledge that once more it was time to set our feet on the pathway to help another earthbound soul towards the light. There'd been a break of 2 months when no spiritual work had been done by the three of us together. For after the summer of so much spiritual enlightenment, there had come a time of rest to allow the germination of the knowledge we had received. But now it was time. We arrived at the church around midday to find nothing changed. We walked into the churchyard through the old iron gate, lifted the latch of the heavy church doors, and stepped into the eternal peace of a God-loving church. There were leaflets on the table near the entrance, telling of the horrifying story of abortion, asking everyone to sign in order to have the Act of Parliament repealed. We did so, understanding from truth given by Spirit that a child is born at the moment of conception, and God alone has the power to give and take life. On the opposite side of the aisle, we glanced at the Vinegar Bible behind its glass case, ever open at the chapter of St. Luke, with the parable of the vinegar written instead of vineyard. and that's why it's called the Vinegar Bible. We wandered up the aisle, waiting for Margot to tell us that her intuition had been correct. Past the pews and the Bevington organ, through the blue-curtained doorway into the Dillington Chapel, where a drop in the temperature was immediately apparent. On the wall were memorial tablets and a framed Dillington family tree, and underneath our feet were the tombstones of the Dillingtons, black marble with faded grey inscriptions. Here lieth the body of. I looked down where my own feet were to read that there lay the mortal remains of Sir Tristram Dillington, died in 1721, aged 42 years. And this is his sad story that unfolded as we stood in the chapel. Do not leave me, my beloved. Oh, my darling, the angels are waiting for you now. I cannot bear life without you. Oh, my beloved. I am sorry I have uttered these words, but they haunt me, just as I haunt here where my body is. My bones may rot, but my thoughts do not. The murderess who killed my wife and children with so filthy a disease that she brought to our home. Oh, why? We were so happy. My lovely house, my money, the paintings, the jewels. None could save my beloved. After my beloved died, I did what I had not done before. I struck a woman. I slapped the Percy woman round the face and knocked her senseless for a few moments in time. You murderess, may you walk the road to the cottage forever, I told her. Then I kissed my dear wife and swore I would join her. My little ones also, now little angels. How cruel fate was to me. I could not continue. The Percy woman left and I was beside myself with grief. Oh, my beloved, wait for me. Man should live his life to his allotted span and not try to be God who decides. Ah, the will of God, so great. Please hear me. My heart broken, my beloved gone, and my little ones. Oh, fate, thy sting was too much for this man. I took my life and therefore disobeyed the will of God. Let all know this to be a wicked deed, not to copy my act, however they may suffer. I have sobbed and cried, but few have heard. The wind, they would say, or the creaking of old wood. Please pray for me by the lovely altar, that my time of sobbing can cease, and that I may join my beloved. A man is known by his deeds. I have been known as the man who took his life, not for any other thing I may have done. Oh, my beloved, will I see you again? But what is this? A ray, a silver ray, beaming like a lifeline from heaven to heave me up. No, a ray of hope? I hear a voice. It calls. Can I reach my beloved? Some man is telling me, now is the time. The earlier would have been too soon. She would not have been there. I do not understand anything, except I am going. I am floating towards the silverest light my eyes have ever beholden. Oh, my darling, beloved of my heart, how I worship thee, how much I have missed thee. I forgive all, and even the Percy woman. I sinned against her too. Oh, my beloved, together, I love you. Well, what can one say? So we knelt in silent prayer for this man who in such tragic circumstances had taken his own life. His sadness was ours for that short while, but we knew that his long period of suffering for the sin he thought he had committed was over, and the moment of reunion with his beloved was now. His joy was for him alone, and we left that beautiful church with a sense of spiritual upliftment, knowing that another soul had been helped towards the light and the Godhead. Now there is a little sequel to that, but I didn't do it. I did not do this rescue. However, Aurea did it with another friend. And I wrote this out. And there is a forerunner to the story of Sir Tristram Dillington. For in the summer of 1979, Margot had been called to, we call it K-Knighton here. It's spelt Knighton with a K, but we have the Knighton with an N and K-Knighton, to K-Knighton Gorges on a rescue mission. But I was not with her. It was another friend, Anne. On a day in August, she was to hear the voice of Elizabeth Percy, the Percy woman of the previous script. K-Knighton Gorges was the estate of a certain Captain Bissett, who I believe was the last lover of the previous lady I wrote. They were all up to it on the Isle of Wight, believe you me. But all that remains in evidence today are two old crumbling stone pillars that once held the gates. From them leads a path to nowhere, because Bissett razed the place to the ground in order that his daughter should not inherit, as she had married against his wishes, and so they stand a witness to the destructive whims of one man's selfishness. This house had been the grandest of all the houses on the island, and it is a site well known for hauntings, and many claim to have heard and seen a carriage and horses come hurtling down the roadway to drive through the gates. It was always assumed to be Dillington, but it was the voice of Admiral Hugh Piggott that spoke to Margot one day as she stood at the entrance, and this case was discussed in detail at the 1978 Parascience Conference. However, the Admiral told of arriving late one night for a visit to Knighton. He had lingered too long over a glass of port, so instructed the coachman to hurry and not spare the horses. As the carriage rounded into the entrance at the bottom of the hill and through the gates, the idiot son of a servant ran out in the pathway of the oncoming horses. He screamed out, but it was too late. The carriage ran him down and he died a horrible death. The Admiral wished to hush it all up, and some gold coins were pushed into the hands of the boy's widowed mother for a vow of silence. When Piggott died, he found himself back at K-Knighton Gorges, listening to the screams of the idiot boy and reliving over and over again the horror of that night. There is such a thing as hell. And it was along this pathway to nowhere that Margot heard the voice of Elizabeth Percy. Forsooth, but I am heard. I have waited. Now a man helps me speak. Sir Tristram Dillington was my employer, and I served his wife as her personal maid. I wept in sorrow when she died of a putrid fever, and her child died also. I thought Sir Tristram would expire with grief. I walked along this lane so happily last spring to a small hut where a wise woman dwelt. She told one's future and saw in the stars at night the fate that was for all. The child's death she told me, but my lady's, no, no. I speak with you for so long, but no longer. Come back, I tell much. Words pouring forth, a lady helps, strange words. It was my fault, the fever. I had visited the old woman who tended a sick child who had this putrid fever. I sat by her on a ragged pallet, an old shawl her only covering. I tore my petticoat to mop her fevered brow. I took the fever back with me, and now I keep looking for the wise woman to help me. Now the lady who helps me to speak will help me too. Please go to the church and pray for me. So wrong to tend a sick child, not good for my lady and her babes. And we went to New Church, or Margot and Anne went to New Church and heard Elizabeth speak for the final time. Surely compassion should be rewarded, yet here compassion was punished. I meant only good when I sat by the child, a grandchild of the old woman, or even a great-grandchild, a dark-eyed, appealing mite. How could I pass by without attempting to cool her? Yet that act made me, Elizabeth Percy, a murderess, as they all succumbed. I see this lady, with eyes also dark shining, through a light of bright yellow, who is helping, lifting. I hear a chorus of angels, perhaps, or the chanting of happy souls who await me. I would tender my grateful thanks for prayers I hear for me, and for the diligence of the writer. Farewell, as I rise to join this beautiful, melodious chorus. And I have a note here on Cainite and Gorges. And it was a manor held by Sir Ralph de Gorges, a crusader, who gave the house its name. It was built up in Elizabethan times by the Dillingtons from Dorset, the most famous being Sir Tristram Dillington, who died in 1721. The house passed through the hands of General Maurice Bockland, which was another of Margot's cases, to Captain Bissett, who ran off with Lady Worsley, the same lady of Fremantle Gate, and at his death in 1821 he had the house demolished to stop his elder daughter inheriting. So those were the stories I was going to tell you. But I do have some more. And there's a lovely house on the island, and it's called Bryston Lodge. I also have a picture of that, which I will show you. Is that showing up? This? Well, that is Bryston Lodge. When I knew it, it wasn't in that state. It was in the state of being restored by some builders. Okay. The Haunting of the Lodge at Bryston. On January the 19th, 1992, I read in the previous county press, the local island newspaper, of a haunted house in Bryston. This mentioned that the house in question, the lodge, was built for Mr. Edmund Street, a member of the gentry and chairman of Ronnock Polish. It is a replica of a Scottish lodge, complete with musicians' gallery and ballroom. And I mentioned this article to Margot, and we decided there and then to go ghost hunting. It was one of those cold, wintry days, but we were not prepared to wait, as it all sounded rather exciting. An old house full of ghosts was just our idea of a good afternoon out. We made our way to Bryston village in the West Wight, with no idea where the lodge was, and even whether we would be able to get close enough for the spirits to speak. We entered the village and came across a couple walking their dog and inquired as to the whereabouts of the lodge. To be told it was well signposted and situated on the left-hand side of the main road. And they added, "You do realise it's haunted?" We didn't explain the purpose of our visit. We parked the car nearby, walked through the gate into the grounds, following a drive that led us to a once beautiful house, now sadly neglected and dilapidated. Peering through the windows, we saw empty rooms bare of the elegant furnishings that had once graced them. Fine marble fireplaces and ruined damp oak floors were all that remained of the splendour that once reigned there. Making our way to the back of the house, we came across a secret garden, now forlorn and overgrown, but some old seats remained along with a grand pair of terracotta urns. We sat down in this peaceful place as Margot became aware of a presence and knew that this was one of the many held within the house and grounds. As the day was too cold to sit around for too long in the garden, we decided to return to the car where she could write more comfortably. A man's voice spoke in her ear, saying he was once the master of the house, but a vile beast who hit his beautiful, undeserving wife on more than one occasion, and took his pretty maidservants whenever his fancy prevailed, and never considered their welfare. He knew Margot could hear him, and she was his only hope, and he hoped that we would not think too harshly of his soul. A pathway of light was now opening up before him, and he could go onwards. We wondered if this was the ghost of Edmund Street. It seemed so many of the gentry believed that this behaviour was their God-given right. Margot believed there were about 5 more earthbound souls at the lodge, and we intended to return at the earliest opportunity. The following Sunday we did so, and the kitchen maid, Mary, told how at 16 she had got a job at the big house as a scullery maid, and paid 6 shillings a week. Living in, said she had two jobs before, but this was the best one. She had to get up at 6 o'clock in order to light the fires for the other servants. Mary took a violent dislike to a boy who came to stay, and at night she put salt in his milk instead of sugar. She began stealing, just a little, a shilling here, a shilling there, from the other servants, and then from her employer. She developed a bad cough and cold, but was unable to stop work, and eventually was sacked for stealing. She had a few jobs afterwards, but died shortly after, and found herself back at the lodge. Another visit to the lodge on the 1st of February to find Brian, one of the workmen, who was still there, kindly allowed us to wander all over the house at will after we explained our purpose. What a beautiful place, just crying out to be loved again. In one of the bedrooms, a young man in his 20s appeared to Margot, dressed in a Norfolk jacket and +4s. His hair was fair and thick. He spoke to her, saying he had come to the lodge to stay with a relative, to convalesce after being injured in the Boer War. It was here that he fell in love with one of the servants, who behaved more as a lady than a servant. She also returned his love, but when his host found out, he was asked to leave. Was this Street, we wondered? He promised to write, but being a poor correspondent, did not do so, and eventually met and married someone else. However, the girl waited in vain for him, turning down the hand of a local lad, and died a lonely old maid. When he died, he found himself back at the lodge, where he had broken his promise to his true love, who he now hoped to meet as he left to go onwards towards the light. A few days later, my husband Reg joined Margot and I on another trip out to the lodge, where we met the builder and his son, along with Brian the painter. We spent some time talking with them, and Brian told us that he felt there was a presence in the room near the wine cellar. We wandered leisurely around the house once more, so that Reg could get the feel of the place and view it all from the inside. However, the builders were quite correct in their assumption about the room. As Margot stood facing the stone cellar, she became aware of a misty figure in there. Rather than stay in the chilly atmosphere, she suggested we sat quietly in the ballroom, which was covered in plastic sheeting, as it was where Brian was working, and she listened to Jim's story. Apparently he had worked in the gardens and had enjoyed playing pranks on the housemaids, Mary in particular. On this day, the owners were away, and he was allowed in the house. It was in this room that he had pulled her apron strings loose, and she had threatened him with her broom. Jim pushed her into the stone room and shut and locked the door. She cried out, and when he went to open it, the lock had jammed, and he had to get other servants to help him, and it was 2 hours before he was able to release her, by which time Mary had fainted. When she eventually regained consciousness, she was filled with fear and never completely recovered from the experience, and he was directly responsible for her breakdown. Jim could never forgive himself for his prank that went so disastrously wrong, and when he died at a young age, he too found himself back at the lodge, where his guilt kept him earthbound. Jim thanked Margot for her help and said he was going on to a much happier place. There seemed to be no more ghosts after that, and eventually the house went up for £245,000. It's up for sale again today, and I'm not quite sure, but it's a lot more than, I think it's over £1 million now. How times have changed. What have I got written here for? Now, I did wonder, I seem to have finished my stories for the day, and I did wonder whether you'd like a little bit more of this that I began to read. I think it was the first episode I began to read, or the second episode. I think it was about the Reincarnation, and I think it was really enjoyed, so I thought I might read a little bit more of this today. It's such a lovely book and so beautifully written. And I'd got to the point where he was going to the Imperial War Museum. This is Peter. Now I can't read without my glasses, sadly. So this is a continuing story of butterflies in a snowstorm. You may remember the beginning of it. The Imperial War Museum was built in 1815 as Bethlehem Hospital to house the inmates moved from the original Bedlam mental institution. The first group of patients arrived by hackney carriage to find that the heating system extended only to the basement and ground floor, and the windows in most part of the accommodation had no glass in order to get rid of the disagreeable effluvius peculiar to all madhouses. Or they had no windows at all. For the first winter they had a choice between freezing winds or darkness. The domed reading room is a magnificent place. It used to be the hospital chapel. It oozes history, and the smell of old books is wonderful. When you make an appointment, you state which books you would like to read, and they are laid out on a table, waiting for your arrival. I had no idea what I needed, but the staff were very helpful, and told me that the best source of information would be Soldiers Died in the Great War, 1914-1919. This monumental work was compiled in 1921. It is made up of 80 volumes containing details of almost 700,000 British service personnel who died in the war. I was clearly going to need some help. I was shown to my desk and was faced with 2 massive leather-bound volumes. I pulled out my crumpled piece of A4 and started working through the list. It was time-consuming, and finding each soldier on my list took a lot of time. I began with the intention of copying out the full details of all 10 names, as I felt these men deserved more than just a tick and a yes or a no. But it took too long, and I ended up jotting down the briefest of notes of those who were about the right age, were killed in France, and who had 1 stripe. The following is copied directly from that same piece of paper. Harry Handel, born Kennington, enlisted Holborn. I won't read all these. There was Harry George Hayes, Private Durham. This was taking ages. Every now and again I would go down to the museum for a café for a tea break. William Henry Higgins, Private, London, Regiment, died in India, not him. Henry Charles Hunt, Lance Corporal, Middlesex Regiment, 11th Battalion, died 11th of April 1917, a possibility. Harry Hunter, an officer in the Royal Flying Corps, not him. H.T. Head, I couldn't find anything on this person. How can a human being leave no trace, no record, nothing? Probably not him. I remember reading somewhere that in 1919 the Royal Army Medical Corps could account for the exact number of artificial eyes they issued during the war. 2,386. But they were not clear about the exact number of soldiers killed. There were accounting errors, records that were destroyed, and there were cases like that told me by a man I met in the museum cafe. He asked me what I was looking for, and I told him, though of course leaving out my reasons. He was looking for further information about his father, who was listed as having been killed in action in 1916. This was clearly not the case, because he could distinctly remember attending his father's funeral in 1950. Over several months he had discovered 2 important facts about his father. One, that he deserted the army in 1916. The other was that he was a bigamist. He had no idea how his father had got from France back to London in 1916. He probably went missing whilst on home leave. It was also a mystery how he managed to vanish without trace, evade both the military police and his wife, to marry somebody else living in a part of London that was right next door. But he did, and the man sitting next to me was the son of his second marriage. He had traced and contacted the children of the first marriage, who were by then elderly. Initially they were shocked that their old dad was a bigamist, but they were thrilled that he hadn't been killed in the war after all. They had recently all met up for a family reunion where everybody got on well together and everybody was looking forward to the next party. Harry George Walter Hurt, died 25th of October, age 24, private. Not him. His name was also on the Thiepval Memorial in the Somme region of France. And this is a mournful place. It is a memorial to those men who were killed on the Somme, whose bodies have never been found. The Somme region was fought over more or less continuously throughout the war, but the Battle of Somme in 1916 was gigantic in the numbers involved and catastrophic in consequence. It was supposed to be the turning point of the war. It was also the first major battle for Kitchener's men who volunteered, flocked to the colours in 1914-15, HH included. It was a disastrous bloodbath. There were over 1,200,000 casualties if you total the British, French and German figures. The death toll was dreadful. Due to the nature of trench warfare, it was often impossible for burial parties to recover all the bodies. Many were left out in no man's land, where the artillery either blew them to pieces or buried them under avalanches of earth. The historian Martin Middlebrook estimates that about 106,973 British soldiers died on the Somme throughout the war and have no known graves. The Thiepval Memorial lists the names of just 73,357 of them. Henry Edward Humphreys, killed in action, not him. Finally, Horace Joseph Hill, born Belvedere, Kent, Royal Field Artillery Territorial, enlisted Erith, Kent, 383 gunner, died at home 27th of June 1916, buried at Erith Cemetery, Book Street. Apparently there are 68 war graves here, not him either. None of these fitted the bill. This particular H.J. Hill was not a Stockwell boy. He came from Kent. This was the only name on my list that didn't fit with what I had been expecting. There must be a mistake somewhere. It was getting late and I had to leave. I waved goodbye to the son of the bigamist, thanked the library staff and headed back to the Isle of Wight. I was as confused as ever and was feeling rather depressed. Seeing all those thousands of names of the dead had dispelled any enthusiasm I had for continuing my search. None of the 10 fitted the facts I had been given, and I was feeling saddened and strangely scared. I was touching things here that were deeper than a simple academic exercise, and I really felt I should drop the whole thing. After a while on the train home, my enthusiasm returned. It could never have been that easy, I thought. Be realistic, I told myself. Go back to the drawing board and keep looking. The journey dragged on forever. I had caught the stopping train by mistake. When I eventually got a seat, I drifted off into a semi-doze and thought back to the last time I visited the Thiepval Memorial. This was years before I had met Margot Williams and knew nothing about a machine gunner buried in my history. We were in France on holiday. I had convinced everybody that the nice little gîte in Picardy was just the place for us. It was a blustery day during the Easter holidays. It was trying to rain, and after about 10 minutes wandering around the memorial, my family started showing signs of mutiny. I know, I said brightly. Let's go to the Newfoundland Memorial. They still have trenches there. They stayed in the car and threatened to abandon me if I took too long. There is a parcel of land that has been left untouched as a permanent memorial to the fallen, and they still do have trenches, and mine craters, and shell holes. Today, much is fenced off to protect it from erosion, but in those days you could go anywhere you wanted. I used to smoke back then, so I jumped into a big shell crater to get out of the wind, lit up, and lay back to smoke in peace for a while. That night, I had one of those dreams, a bad one. I had gone back to Ventnor to show Margot and Carolyn some of the things I had found out about H.H. and to ask some more questions. I explained the apparent contradictions surrounding the H.J. Hill on the Stockwell Memorial and the H.J. Hill I had found in the Imperial War Museum. Margot reiterated what she had already told me about H.H. and suggested I go back and try again. So I did. I phoned the Imperial War Museum and made another appointment. This time I put thought into my book request and asked for advice about a soldier who might have fired a machine gun. "Ah," the librarian said, "you need Soldiers Died Great War Part 75, the Machine Gun Corps and the Tank Corps." Shortly after 11 in the morning on Saturday the 29th, February 1992, I was sitting under the dome of the ex-chapel, noticing for the first time that written in dramatic style on the wall in front of me were the 10 Commandments. On my table was a much thinner volume than before, and there was no sign of the bigamist's son. It didn't take me long. On my last visit, I had mistakenly found an H.H. who wasn't on the Stockwell War Memorial. He was a gunner in the artillery. This time, there was no mistake. On a small piece of paper, I wrote, 11:15, February the 29th, 1992, Reading Room, Imperial War Museum. 11:30, I found him. Harold Joseph Hill, born Wandsworth, Surrey, enlisted Stockwell, 43809, Lance Corporal, DOW F+F, 17417, formerly 5131 London Regiment, Machine Gun Corps, Infantry. Well, Harry, my boy, I've found you. H.H. is Harold Joseph Hill, who lived in Stockwell. He is the H.J. Hill on the Stockwell Memorial. Margot was right. He had one stripe, so he was a Lance Corporal, and he was in the Machine Gun Corps. In the 6-man gun teams, it was usually the corporal or the Lance Corporal who fired the gun. She said he had been wounded whilst firing a machine gun. I'm going to leave a little bit there. It said, today I could have found all this information and more online in less than 2 minutes, including a photograph of H.H.'s headstone in Monthuon Military Cemetery, Le Tréport, France. I'm glad I did it the hard way. I'm pleased that I went there in person on 2 occasions to take the photograph myself. And there is the photograph in the middle of Harold Joseph Hill's grave. Shall we? My father died in the summer of 1992, and various life events dominated much of my time. 2 years after first reading the name of Harold Joseph Hill, I decided it was time I found out about some more. I did not want to gather a lot of information. I didn't want to access his military records or find out about his background. I just wanted a photograph. I was driven to know what he looked like. I went to the Lambeth Archives Department at the Minute Library in Knatchpool Road, London, to search through microfilm copies of South London Press. It was not unusual for a death notice in a newspaper to be accompanied by a small photograph, and I was very keen to see if one existed. I searched through all the editions from the summer of 1917. Under the heading Stockwell, I read, killed Sergeant C.J. Painter, London. Died of wounds, Lieutenant Corporal H.J. Hill, MGC. Wounded F.R. Brewer, London. Bombardier Keats. Missing H.T. Jackson, R.B. I was hoping to discover something that I didn't already know, but this brief notice was all I found. So it was back to the Isle of Wight with very little to show for my day out. I did feel discouraged and thought that perhaps this was as far as I could go. I really didn't know what to do next. I contacted the Machine Gun Corps, Old Comrades Association, in the hope they could provide me with further information. But despite their generosity of time, they could tell me no more than I knew already. I thought it might be worth getting in touch with the South London Press to see if they would be willing to help. Possibly some family members still lived in the Stockwell area and may have a fading photograph of a young man home from leave during the Great War. I did contact the paper, but after a couple of calls and a letter, nothing appeared in print, and the pressures of daily life took up all my time. The years passed and I gave up my search for the photograph. I believed there was no more I could do. I had reached the end. Once, when driving back from a holiday in Spain, we detoured to Le Tréport so I could show my wife H.H.'s headstone, but that was it as far as H.H. was concerned. We moved abroad and the documents I had collected were placed in a cardboard box that went into storage along with all our things. H.H. was not forgotten. There is a framed photo of his headstone hanging on my study wall, but my quest was over. Many years later, when we were living in North Carolina, I idly entered Stockwell War Memorial into Google search box. What came up surprised and delighted me. Stockwell War Memorial now has its own website with a great deal of information about the men whose names are remembered there. There is also a group known as the Friends of Stockwell War Memorial. I sent an email telling of my interest in H.J. Hill, although not explaining my reasons. Within a short time I was presented with several pages of material which I didn't know existed. In the past I had been told that all the records of the Machine Gun Corps had been destroyed in the Blitz. For most this was the case, but fortunately H.H.'s records had survived. They were smoke and water damaged, but they are perfectly legible. The information they contain corroborates what Margot Williams told me a long time ago. The following is taken directly from the Stockwell Memorial website, for which I am very grateful. Harold Joseph Hill worked for the Admiralty as a clerk. On the 13th of November 1915, the day Hill volunteered, J.S. Barnes, head of War Registry, wrote a careful note. Mr. H.J. Hill has received permission to leave the Admiralty in order to enlist in the Army. Later, on 9th of December 1915, they made a request which sets out all the possibilities for their former clerk, aside from survival. 43809 H.J. Hill. Please notify Admiralty in event of this man's discharge, death, etc., or of his being granted a commission, or being reported missing, or prisoner of war. This duly happened with a note coming back on the 6th of June 1917, addressed to the Secretary, Admiralty, Whitehall. With reference to your letter of the 9th December 1915, reference number 4E5800/1914, I deeply regret to inform you that number 43809, Lance Corporal Harold Joseph Hill, MGC, formerly number 5131's 2nd London Regiment, has been reported to this office as having died of wounds on the 17th of May 1917 at the General Hospital, Le Tréport, France. Lieutenant for Colonel, I/C of Records, MGC 91 York Street, Southwest. Harry's records show that he was wounded in action on the 6th of May and was admitted to hospital with gunshot wounds to the abdomen, forearm and back the following day. He died 10 days later. The records also show that Harry was just 5 foot 5 inches above average height and weighed 119 pounds. His chest measurement was 33 inches, which he could expand 2 inches. He signed up at 9 Tufton Street, London, Southwest 1. He had one sibling, Henrietta, 26, who lived at Herbert Road. And below is what Margot Williams had told me. H.H. worked in an office. Though he was young, it was an important job. The Admiralty at the time of the war is a pretty important place to work. He was a lance corporal with one stripe. He fired a machine gun. He was in the Machine Gun Corps. He was the youngest child. He had an older sister of whom he was exceptionally fond. He died of wounds on the 17th of May 1917 at No. 3 General Hospital, Le Treport, France. This was his 21st birthday. Margot was correct. Margot told me he had been shot and died as a result of bullet wounds. There it was, in black and white. The 1901 census shows that the Hill family was then living at 23 Tonsley Road. Harry Hill's father, Joseph Snare Hill, was a plasterer, born in Westminster in 1854. His mother, Emma, was born in Hanwell in 1856. Harry had only one sibling, Henrietta, born in 1893. However, the census shows that he had two other siblings, Albert F. Hill, 19, a flour merchant's clerk, born in Battersea in 1882, and Ethel M. Hill, 17, a tea merchant's clerk, born in Clapham. By 1911, the family had moved to 153 Trentham Street, Streatham. Joseph Square Hill had died and Albert had left home or was otherwise absent from the house. Ethel was working as a ledger clerk and Henrietta was now a compiling clerk. By 1911, his father, Joseph Snare Hill, was deceased. Margot was right again. H.H. was the youngest child of a second marriage, and by the time he joined the army, his mother was a widow. She also told me that his father's previous marriage produced 3 children, but only 2, Albert and Ethel, were listed here. In 2010, a man contacted me through his website. Harold Joseph Hill was his half-great-uncle. He explained that his great-grandfather, H.H.'s father, had 5 surviving children from 2 marriages. Harold and his sister Henrietta, Hetty, resulting from the second of these, so there were 3 other siblings. Maybe one was away from home on the day of the census. This proved to be the case. There was an older half-brother called Frank. Margot was right again. He then sent me photographs of H.H. and his family and completed my impossible search. And for this, I am profoundly grateful. And there is Harold Joseph Hill. What an amazing story. That isn't the end, but I think it's the end as far as people need to hear that the information that Margot gave was absolutely correct in every way. She was an amazing super psychic. And she's still communicating with Robin now. Oh, there was one other thing I wanted to speak about. I was talking about the Exaltians, the men from the stars last time. And I did find the last lot of information they gave us when they came back in 1992, which I thought perhaps people would like to hear. So this was the return of the Exaltians, St Boniface Down, August 27th, 1992. St Boniface Down is just there, outside my window. Some time ago, a few of our fellow beings spoke to you. They returned, and now we have come from Exalt, the ones with the creamy skin. We came in another golden craft, larger than the last. Our predecessors were sad over the cruelty of man. We are making a recording of all we see and hear over this and the attitude of man. The sea is being poisoned. The creatures of the oceans that are more intelligent than man are being caught, killed, or trained to perform. But we are so surprised at the cruelty to one another. Man against man in so many lands. We have nothing like this. We are happy, intelligent beings, and so like man to look at, but not in nature. Next time, come with love in your heart. You are fortunate to be more intelligent than a lot of your fellow creatures. You hear and see. So many are blind and deaf. So you can be contacted in clear air, which is up high. Come again, the power weakens. I, the Exaltian, can contact you once more through intergalactic control system. Did you know that from other galaxies we can belong to this group, as you appear to? The hole in your ozone layer, as you call it, is very large, and your leaders only talk and do nothing. The scientific men, who are only infants to us, should work out a formula using the XY- codes to find the solution. It can be done. We had trouble a long time ago, many hundreds of Earth years, and we solved it. Equations, logarithms, as your learned men call them. Never mind those infantile computers, which do not give accurate results. They are for young children to play with. We will see if we can help by using some of our knowledge. You need help urgently. I shall report on this on a week or so, as I have to communicate with base. I am pleased you belong, as you are friendly towards us. That evening I asked the question, why did the Exaltians not use the media and TV directly? John Powles answered in this manner. It has been proved more difficult than to get through to powerful mediums, and it is better to get through to individuals, as it is taken more notice of. People do not know what goes on behind the closed doors of government, and our leaders know more than they let on to the general public. You must realise that the time is not right for the public to know. They have tried to use TV since The Voice from Space, but it hasn't worked, as those in charge of broadcasting were aware of what was happening and blacked it out. Now, I don't know if you know about The Voice from Space. I don't know whether I have got a copy of it somewhere, and if I can find it, I'll read it. It was interrupted the news one day with a whole, like I'm talking to you now, really, about what we were doing to our planet and how dangerous life is. Anyway, we returned to St Boniface Down. Hoping to hear from the Exaltian, but we were too early, and Jane Taylor came through and took the opportunity to speak, telling us of Margot's life on Ixalt, between lives in Lemuria and Atlantis, and the present Exaltians are attempting to repair the hole in the ozone layer, as our scientists are only infants in this field. That is what Jane had to say to us. And then the next time we did connect, and this is the words we heard. Intergalactic Control 160, that is our code. Everything is being done from now on by us and 7 other members of the command. More will join us if necessary. The large hole is responsible for many disasters like floods and cyclones. Your scientists are useless. I have been informed they would not know what the minus code I gave them was. This is so simple to us, and it is in our interest that this hole gets smaller instead of growing, as it affects our plans for planet Earth in the future. I may speak again in a week. Once more, the ship from Ixalt, I greet you. We are working very hard and are sure we can succeed with our mission. I understand you have heard of strange beings who take over the bodies of Earthlings. This is unknown to us, and I am sure we know more on this subject than anyone, so be careful not to believe all you hear. There are many planets that have life on them, more intelligent than ours, more intelligent than yours, as I know you are aware of this. We have a plan for planet Earth, and it is not to be destroyed, so be assured our work is not for your distress. Words come difficult at times. Be prepared to hear me again with news how the work is proceeding. That is all you have to know. A week and a day. Come back. And so we did. Greetings once more from our craft, which is beyond the reach of your primitive radar system. I hear your remarks. We are about 6 to 6 1/4 of your earthly feet in height. I hope that satisfies your earthly curiosity. Yes, we realise 2 of you once lived on our planet. This was before our grandfather's time, as you would call them. Now to the Earth's problems. The ozone hole we are taking care of. It will get no larger, and it should get smaller. Global warming will not get beyond what it is, and the Earth is not tilting, as some of your primitive people are saying. We plan much later to enter the Earth's population, yet it will be with the Earth people's blessing, and not by force. I shall not be there myself. I hope this answers any further queries you have on this subject. You may or may not hear from time to time from us, or from our neighbours. I am pleased to have made contact. And that was the last time we heard from Ixalt, as our information source was then changed. And then the information started coming through Robin in 95. And it's been going on ever since. And of course the first thing that the last people I worked with were extraterrestrials with Margot, and the first people I worked with Robin were the Elders of Zor, the extraterrestrials. And it began all over again and continues to this day. This is September the 14th, 2021, given to me by Robin. The predisposition of the human framework is part of the united front that happens with us all. The unity within man has changed so much. You must understand that as we change, our perspective must change alongside. We as human beings do not understand elongation. That elongation that comes from the planetary influences. Planetary influences are part of the input and output. You must all understand that input and output isn't necessarily the input and output that we just predominantly lay down. This is everything and every planetary influence's input and output, all put into one melting pot. Now, we have spoken and discussed before about the body of Christ as such, that carries a duplication of the complete blood list. Now let me talk about the blood list. He carried the unity of blood for all functions of life. He brought that down to planet Earth. Not only did he, and I didn't get the word there, but I presume it was manifest, or did he come as a man, but he studied human form and took that back with him when he eventually left this planet, not as spoken about in the Bible. So he took his whole form back with him when he went back. So much other went on with the Christing. The Christing is about the bloodline, and the bloodline that has, is, and will be continued on planet Earth. He travelled to many different planets. Yes, you could call him the Son of God, and indeed he is part of God, as you are, the listener and the speaker. He travelled the universe wide, displaying the blood that he carried. The fractalization of the blood would be an interesting component for scientists to look at, because fractalization of the standard human bloodline is very different. But of course all things are different. They are designed to be so. But the differences often make up similarities, and it is those similarities that is the makeup of common human beings. Now, the common human being is not a state of demeanour. What it is just a constance. It is that bloodline within you all that determines what it is and how it is that you do. So to look at this in a more complex way, you must understand the blood has to change. This is not talking about bad blood or good blood. We are talking about blood has to change within. This is not talking... I've repeated myself. You have to allow the energy of the transmissions that are coming to you all from outside of your universe. All these things are bringing about change within the dimensions of your bloodline. My children, my people, my person. You will all experience dilemmas. Do not infiltrate your blood with undetermined factors. Do not create bad blood. There are many such things that are there capable of changing the way your blood factors will occur. Fractalization is part of what it is that needs to occur for you on a pure form. The components of your blood will change, and your unity of yourself and your connectivity to the universe and the multiverse and the ethos of change that is required from all beings, not only on this planet, but in the multiverses beyond. There is a need for change, not just by humanity and planet Earth. There is a need for change wholeheartedly throughout the universe. It is the end of experimentation. This is beyond the faculties of God infiltrating and changing. This is about the organisation of the human soul and the spirit that is carried throughout the universe, because after all, soul is part of everything, as everything else is part of him or her. There is no disconnection. You have all been many things, not just the simple human being you find yourself at this point in time, with predetermined genetics caused by many, many, many changes. We are going to move temporarily to the process of what rock is. All planets are rock in some form, and they move around the universe, gathering and bringing information. Now that rock in itself gets covered in fauna, and that fauna then allows nature to be created. But behind all nature is rock. Rock is a spiralling modality of many, many different cells. They don't all touch. Look at a stone or a pebble on the beach. If you could look at it and see its molecules, none of them touch. There is space between all things. We will not go into the quantums of this, but what one is stating here is rock in itself is not perceived in the way it should be. It carries and harnesses so much information. It brings about change that you have no relevance whatsoever to understand. The child recently had to connect to rock, and did not in his own mind, but did in another. That connectivity to rock was not just about holding the rock like a crystal and picking up on its componentization. It was about connecting back to what it is that we have all come from. Because without rock, there would be no fauna, and without fauna, there would be no life. Without life, there would be no soul, and without soul, there would be no evolvement or devolvement in all the natural processes that occur on that land. Why I was talking about this is just evolving the mind into a different spectrum of thinking. The mind has a parallel, a stop and start point, a little bit like a race. But do not be part of a race. Be part of an objectivity that allows all things to focus in every direction. Do not be controlled and stopped. Do not be harnessed by other people's thoughts. Just be what it is that you are. Stand as a rock. Stand hard and firm and ultimately be loved. These are the words that the Jesuit, the Jesus, spoke about. Be loved. He was, after all, a man carrying the bloodline of the Jesuit, but that bloodline in itself he did not fully understand, but he knew he carried something different, just as you do, my children, my people, my person. Everyone carries a small, isolated segment of that bloodline, because after all, you are all connected. It is about being objective with change. Allow change to manifest itself. Change has to come for things to look different. Nothing can stay the same, because all things must change, and they must change soon. You are blessed, my children, with so many assets. The gift of life, the gift of love, the gift of death, strangely enough, the realization that all things do not stop at that point. It is the start of something else. As you stop here, you find yourself suddenly with so many different assets outside of this domain. You will see many people, touch many things, yet you still do not have the full picture at that point. Yes, indeed, you have relinquished yourself of the frequency of human form with the opportunity to move outside of that and back to whatever form, depending on your state of evolutionary cycle and depending on the characteristics of what you have become involved in. But you must understand that we all, as human beings, have been something or other at one point or another. It isn't about being divisive at this point. It is about letting go and allowing your blood in itself to become a new faculty within. Worship it as you would do your best friend, and it will worship you as if you are its best friend too. For now we will stop. God bless you. Much love to you all, from us to you. That's it. Well,